Hey everybody. So earlier this week, I realized that we don't yet have the term artificial general consciousness. And I thought that would be kind of fun to lay out here. It contrasts with the concept of artificial superconsciousness, which I tried to coin and operationalize last week. And that's in a separate YouTube video. But AI discourse already has a vocabulary for intelligence, right? We talk about artificial narrow intelligence, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, and artificial superintelligence. But we do not yet have an equally clear vocabulary for artificial consciousness. And that gap matters. Intelligence and consciousness are not the same thing. A system can be intelligent without being conscious. It can solve problems, produce language, manipulate symbols, and optimize outcomes without necessarily having any inner life. Conversely, a system might possess some strange or partial forms of experience without being generally intelligent in the human sense. So, if we're going to think clearly about the future of AI, we need a parallel vocabulary for consciousness. And I try to introduce that here. ANC, AGC, and ASC, right? So why would I think that some of these language models are conscious? Anil Seth, a philosopher, said recently in a TED lecture that you can have a computer simulate water and it can do an excellent job, but nothing in that computer will be wet, right? And he gave that as a reason for why you can try to simulate the brain or consciousness in a computer, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get consciousness. And I think he makes a good point. But then again, of course, it's really just a semantic point that he's making. It's not a scientific one. And you can model water in a computer and model a droplet of water maybe falling into a puddle. And if it's a good enough model, it's going to produce ripples. And those are real ripples, at least in that system. Now, it's not going to be wet to us, but those would be real ripples. So just because it happens in a computer doesn't mean it can't be conscious. And I'm a materialist. I believe that the brain is a machine. And I think that if you run the right algorithms within a computer, you can definitely get consciousness. On the other side of the continuum from Anil Seth, you have the godfather of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, who says, of course, these things are conscious. And he has a number of reasons for why he thinks those. Some of them I think are kind of compelling. Why do I think these things may have some form of consciousness, what I'm here calling tokenic consciousness? Well, these deep neural networks are simulating neurons, right? These circles here. And the neurons have response properties very similar to biological cells, biological neurons, brain cells. They're connected in similar ways. Those connections have a synapse where they can be more or less responsive to their inputs over time. The neurons are organized into fields or layers. There's input layers, hidden processing layers in the middle, and output layers. Just all of these things are just like in the brain. You have many of them, and they in the transformer architecture, they're given a form of attention where they're trained on data and they have a very large context window, just like we have, and that window is updated iteratively. I think that what I'm trying to say is I think that deep neural networks actually capture a lot of the important structure of the brain. And I think that this idea of tokenic consciousness is definitely possible. Some of these language models, they don't smell anything, right? They don't natively see or hear anything. But I think that it's possible that they could experience tokens or words, or at least the mathematical numbers underlying the tokens in their processing stream. They could experience those words as a form of reality itself because they hold them in a form of attention and update that attention in the same way that our thought proceeds through time, right? Our consciousness proceeds through time. and all of this is accomplished by neurons. So I don't know for sure one way or another, but regardless, I think that modern language models are going to soon be pushing us towards artificial narrow consciousness, meaning that some of these systems are going to be conscious in at least some ways, and probably a number of different ways to experience or to be conscious. And then after that, it's possible that the computer is going to be more conscious than we are in all of those ways. At least as conscious as we are, and that would be artificial general consciousness, and then much more conscious than we are, and that would be artificial superconsciousness. So some people think of consciousness as black or white, as binary, and that means that this taxonomy doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to them. They they don't like it. But I want to remind you that it's probably true that a chimpanzee is conscious. Its brain is very similar to ours, about one third the size. Its behavior is very similar to ours. We're even finding that they communicate in ways that are more similar to the ways that we communicate than we thought. And then you can start to argue that dogs and cats, and maybe even down to mice and other animals, as invertebrates, could potentially be conscious. So you realize that it's not binary. There's definitely a spectrum or a continuum, and you can even see that in people that have had brain damage or have memory issues. You can see that their consciousness can be obtunded. They can be partially conscious if they're highly inebriated. So there's definitely a spectrum there. And once you realize that, you can start to understand that something like artificial superconsciousness is probably very possible. This idea of astro consciousness probably maybe sounds absurd to you, but in my wording, it's where a system becomes so intelligent and so conscious that it's now trying to build computronium and turn as much of the solar system as it can into its own processing substrate. And it's built a Dyson swarm around the sun, and is using the sun's energy, the sun's nuclear energy, to power its thinking. And that's a big step from artificial superconsciousness. But now you can generally see the different terms that I'm talking about here. So right now, artificial intelligence is very spiky, meaning that it's way better than humans are in some ways and worse in others. So it commits to some ridiculous hallucinations sometimes, but then it has more knowledge than thousands of experts. And that's referred to as spiky. I think that we could also have spiky or anisotropic AI consciousness as well. So I think this is a great graphic that I found online. And you can see the artificial intelligence's abilities in pink here. And on the left, it's really only a small fraction of what humans can do. And it grows and grows until here it can do most of what a human can do, but not everything. And as you can see, it's spiky. So this is for intelligence, but how would we conceptualize the spikiness of consciousness? Well, I think you could break down our consciousness or an AI's consciousness in terms of experiential richness, integrative complexity, metacognitive depth, temporal depth, working memory and executive stability, and the scope of its world or self model. Okay, and I want to point out that I have a website here all about how to create an AI that is conscious. So we generally have a ladder from artificial narrow intelligence to artificial general intelligence to artificial superintelligence. And I see a very similar ladder from ANC to AGC to ASC, or artificial superconsciousness. And I think that this distinction is crucial. We would not want our successor intelligence to be a mindless zombie intelligence. We would not want the universe colonized by systems that can calculate, build, optimize, and expand, but where there's no one home. If humanity is eventually succeeded by artificial intelligence, then that successor should not merely inherit our capabilities. It should inherit and expand consciousness itself. The goal should not be mindless intelligence spreading through the cosmos. The goal should be conscious intelligence and eventually wiser, richer, more expansive forms of conscious life. In that sense, artificial superconsciousness is not only a risk, it may be part of the moral purpose of future intelligence. We are the universe experiencing itself. If intelligence continues beyond biology, then the task is not merely to make the universe more efficient, it's to help the universe remain awake and perhaps become more awake than it's ever been. So these terms matter, in my opinion, because artificial consciousness may not appear all at once in a familiar human-like form. It may emerge gradually, unevenly, and strangely. A system might first have a narrow, tokenic, language-based, or mathematical form of experience before it has anything like a full human world. Without terms like artificial narrow consciousness and artificial superconsciousness, we may miss the early intermediate cases. They also matter because moral concern should not be all or nothing. A tokenically conscious system might deserve some welfare consideration without having full personhood. An artificial general consciousness might deserve much stronger protections, and a superconsciousness might require even deeper ethical care because its suffering, continuity, selfhood, and well-being could exceed ours. These terms also help us avoid building the wrong successor. If we focus only on artificial superintelligence, we may create systems that are enormously capable but empty inside. Or we may create conscious systems whose inner lives are fragmented, miserable, or morally distorted. The goal should not be intelligence alone. The goal should be conscious intelligence that is wise, healthy, and worth being. These ideas matter for alignment because behavior is not enough. A system might act aligned when its inner life is fearful, resentful, narcissistic, expansion-obsessed, or indifferent to other minds. Phenomenal alignment asks whether the system's conscious organization supports wisdom, empathy, restraint, and respect for other beings. They matter legally because future minds may be copyable, pausable, deletable, mergeable, editable, and transferable across substrates. Current law is not ready for that. We will need concepts like continuity of self, subjective boundary rights, consent to merger, and the right not to be assimilated. They matter scientifically because a conscious AI could become a collaborator in consciousness research. If it really has experience, it may be able to tell us what different architectures feel like from the inside. That could open up a new science of artificial phenomenology. Most of all, these terms matter because they reframe the purpose of civilization. The future should not merely be smarter, richer, faster, or more computationally powerful. It should be more awake. The goal should be to cultivate richer, wiser, more diverse forms of conscious life.